Hey everyone, Brady from Texturelabs.org here. In this video, we're going to build this vintage archival film grain look in After Effects. When I say in After Effects, I mean we're going to do it using no stock footage overlays, no plugins, just good old-fashioned After Effects. Now here's the thing about this project. In order to create a convincing, organic-looking effect, we're talking about a number of individual details that all come together to simulate the chaos of analog film. And what's cool about this is that there's infinite room to experiment, whether it's exaggerating some elements for a heavier, distressed 8mm effect, or emphasizing other elements for sort of an organic, dreamy music video look. But that means there are a handful of pieces that we need to cover. 9 different elements. Each of these is applied as its own layer. Individually, they're pretty simple, made up of between 1 and 5 effects, a couple of basic expressions. So in this video, my plan is to kind of summarize how each layer is built. We'll look at what effects it's made of and what purpose they serve, and I'll include all the specific details of each setting on screen. So you can always pause the video if you want to just build these layers verbatim. All right, with that being said, let's get into After Effects. So I've got an After Effects project here. I'm gonna be working in HD for this video, but of course for broadcast or theatrical, you might wanna work at 4K, which is gonna mean a handful of different settings. So for 4K, I'll include some additional values in blue. One more note about the project, I'm working in 16-bit color mode because we're gonna be using some soft, blurry, fuzzy shapes. 16-bit is gonna give us cleaner looking results. So I built kind of a test plate here, tried to get both some flat graphic shapes and some footage in there as well, and just put these all in a pre-comp, which is not a necessity, but it'll keep things a little bit more clear. Let's get started with layer number 1, the light leaks layer. So this is going to give us some of these subtle flashes of color that can result from anything from imperfections in the camera body to uneven emulsion on the film. So this is going to be a black solid with 3 effects, starting with the fractal noise effect, and I'm going to dial in a big, soft, simple fractal noise with an expression on the evolution to give it some ongoing animation. Now, if you're not familiar with expressions, here's the general idea. You find the value down here that you want to animate, give the little stopwatch an Alt or Option click, and then type in your expression. And now the evolution value is driven automatically by this tiny little piece of code, which we call an expression. Next effect is CC Toner to give it some color. I'm going to use the pentatone option for a little bit more control and give the dark tones some blue color. But here's really the key. The midtone color has a wiggle expression on it. So this midtone color is going to fly all over the place and give us these random variations of color. Then one more big soft fractal noise effect with a similar expression to drive the evolution, but here the effect itself is going to be set to multiply. So this will multiply on top and tone down those bursts of color, make them appear a little bit less frequent and more random. So that's all the effects. I'm going to set this layer to screen mode, and here it is on our footage. Okay, next layer, color correction. So this is an adjustment layer with a handful of effects. So first of all, a big, soft, subtle glow effect to create a little bit of softness, like light bouncing around inside the camera body. Then 2 effects that are directly targeting the color. So first of all, the channel mixer effect. And all I'm going to do here is change the blue channel so that it gets 50% of its value from the green channel and the remaining 50% from the original blue. So that has the effect of neutralizing the yellow tones, pushes things into more of that bronze and teal color palette. It's just a really cheap and easy way to limit the color palette. Very subtle, but it's going to get more pronounced when we crank up the color using this lumetri color effect. You can obviously spend as much or as little time as you want dialing in the specifics of the color here. I gotta say, I kind of like using just this very first creative preset, the Cinespace 2383, which is meant to approximate Kodak 2383 film, probably the most celebrated print stock of all time. It's not a film stock that you shoot on, it's a film stock that you print the negative to. So this preset is actually meant to replicate what it would look like if we printed this image onto Kodak 2383 film. The one thing I've noticed is that it tends to overdo it on warming up the highlights. So in the highlight tint, I'm just going to drag this value slightly toward the bluish cyan just to balance that out. And now that the contrast is quite a bit more intense, it's also a lot more clear what the channel mixer effect was doing. So channel mixer off and on. Okay, next up is CC vignette. Of course, we need some vignetting, although I've brought down the amount to about 50. And finally, a levels effect. And this does something very simple. It's just going to lift up the blacks and push down the whites so that we never get a full true black or true white. Okay, on to the next layer. This is an adjustment layer called Flicker. Very, very simple with just one effect, the exposure effect, and I'm gonna put a wiggle expression on the exposure value. That's gonna give us this subtle flickering effect, and our image overall is starting to feel a little bit more lively. And now we're gonna get into the fun part, the dust and grunge layers here. So starting with a layer called dust, and this is gonna be a solid layer. The color of the solid doesn't matter because we're gonna fill it with fractal noise. This is gonna be a smeary fractal noise, extremely high contrast with an expression on the random seed to give us the animation. So it looks like this. Then a set channels effect with the alpha source set to luminance. That'll key out the black. Then a noise effect cranked all the way up to 100 to introduce some noisy color. Unsharp mask to increase the contrast and bring out more little crunchy details. And finally, a Gaussian blur to smush it all back together. Now, it's a subtle layer. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of dust here, but once it's in motion, your eyeball really does start to register these little pops of light and dark and even a little bit of color. And if we zoom in, there actually is a decent amount of action going on. Okay, moving on to the next layer, damage, and this is gonna be a little bit like the dust layer, but these are gonna be bigger, more extreme, but less frequent grungy shapes. This layer is another solid with, of course, another fractal noise effect, and here I'm creating expressions on both the scale height and on the random seed. So this fractal noise is gonna fly all over the place, bringing the brightness way down so it only shows up every once in a while, followed by the extract effect to change the black values to transparent. Then another fractal noise, no animation or anything. This effect is just set to hard light mode and it's going to create a little bit more chaos in the light and dark values. Then finally the CC toner effect to give it this bluish green tone. So this damage layer is just going to pop in every once in a while and kind of catch your eye with some grungy details. Okay, next layer, another solid layer. This one's gonna be called Blobs. It's another very simple layer with, of course, another fractal noise effect dialed in to create some occasional little rounds dot flashes. Then the CC toner effect to give it some color. And I'm gonna set this layer to multiply. And we'll move on to the next layer, which is gonna be vertical scratches in the film. So again, a solid layer with the fractal noise effect. And in this case, the fractal noise is going to be scaled all the way up on the vertical scale. But even that doesn't give us quite enough vertical stretching to create just simple long stripes. So the layer itself is also going to be scaled up to 2000% on the y-axis. Then a turbulent displace effect with some expressions on the amount and on the size, plus an expression to drive the random seed. And we've got our kind of jittery vertical lines, and this layer is going to get set to multiply. So here's what we've got so far, and I've actually saved two of the most default film effect kind of adjustments for last. So first of all, an adjustment layer called grain, and for the grain, I'm just going to use kind of my standard grain settings, which you've probably seen me use before, add some noise, then a Gaussian blur to kind of work it down into the image, and finally an unsharp mask to sharpen it all back up together. That also has the effect of kind of massaging all the little previous bits of dust and grunge and everything down into the image. Now you'll notice that the blur and the unsharp mask combined start to create some weird artifacts on the borders of the image. That's okay, we're gonna crop in just a little bit in the next and last step, which is one more adjustment layer called gate weave. So gate weave is kind of that jittery jumping around of the image that happens when the film passes through the gate of the camera or of the projector. So this layer has only one effect, the transform effect, but it has a slightly more complex expression on the position, because here what we're doing is defining a wiggle for the x-axis and a separate wiggle for the y-axis. So the x-axis is pretty subtle, and this is just going to wiggle back and forth a little bit. On the y-axis, we're including these additional values for octaves and amplitude multiplier. That means the movement can have both small vibrations and also occasionally jump around with a few larger movements. Because we're now moving the entire image around, we also need to crop in just a little bit by bringing the scale up to 101.5%. So that is the gate weave adjustment layer, thus concluding the setup for this film grain effect. Let's take a look at the before and after. And we can also check out just a few other examples. So this is the exact same treatment applied over just a few different types of footage. So overall, kind of a medium weight effect, but of course there are a few ways we can adjust this. First of all, we can just make the whole thing more intense, and for the most part, that's going to be a matter of changing the brightness value on the fractal noise effects just by pushing that brightness so that more of the film damage, more of the dust and the blobs show up. Maybe turning up the settings on the grain, we can get a much heavier effect. Additionally, you might want to experiment with the scale of some of these layers. So if we go for some giant blobs and damage, and make the whole thing black and white, we can get kind of a heavy 1950s film reel look going. Or for a more contemporary piece of footage, maybe we make it more subtle, lose the damage and the scratches, make this light leaks layer a little brighter, and really let that be more of a central element. All right, well, that's it for now. I hope you enjoy experimenting with this effect. I'll also include a link below that has all the settings just listed out in one place. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.
And here it is, the greatest advance in television since color television itself.